Hi, good day, everybody, and welcome to today's ISE webinar, where we're going to be talking about skills-based hiring for the AI era. I've just been talking about in our green room before we went live how much of a hot topic this is at the moment, how it's stirring lots of thoughts and lots of debate across our sector. So we're going to be getting into the nitty-gritty of it very, very shortly. My name's Steve Isherwood, Joint Chief Executive of the ISE, responsible for our research and insight side of the work that we do. And I'll be acting as kind of host for the webinar today. If you haven't joined an ISE webinar before, we'd like to make these as interactive as possible. So please do use the Q&A. Please use the chat function. We will have time at the end to answer your questions once we've been through the core content. So please do use those. I'll be keeping an eye on it. We're bringing today's webinar in partnership with Arctic Shores. Arctic Shores, one of our supplier partners, do a lot of work with Arctic Shores throughout the year. So big thank you. First of all, to Arctic Shores for helping pull this together and putting the agenda together and providing the content for it. And we are also recording the webinar, so you will get a link to the webinar over the next sort of couple of days or so, however long it takes for Zoom to process that with some additional information. So please do revisit any content you miss, or do very much, share the love with your teams. We are keen to get as much of our content and insights out as much as possible to really help our industry deal with the challenges they are facing at the moment. So that's enough for me. Let's get stuck into the content. Let's do some introductions first. Joe, would you like to say hello, who you are and your role, etc.?
Love to. Thanks, Stephen. Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Sidley. I am the head of talent acquisition for Molson Coors Beverage Company across EMEA APAC. Molson Coors, we are provide a lot of the brands that most people are aware of, so quite famous beer, cider and beverage brands. And yeah, happy to be here. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Joe. Ian, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Stephen. Ian Lindsay. I'm head of talent at CISC. We're Ireland's biggest construction company. We have a good presence in UK and Europe, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we do. But early careers is a real passion and a real focus of what I do in my role.
Thank you, Ian. And Estelle, would you like to introduce yourself, and why don't you go straight into your content from there, rather than sort of putting more breakages in. So Estelle, over to you.
Great stuff. Hi, everyone. I'm Estelle McCartney, and I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Arctic Shores, the task-based psychometric assessment. And we've worked with hundreds of companies over the years, supporting them in their early careers hiring, and also more recently in what we call their kind of hard-to-fill roles hiring. We are the authors of the playbook on CV-less hiring, and we are just putting the finishing touches on our next playbook, which will be published in about 10 days' time, which is a playbook all about this topic of skills-based hiring. So we are delighted to be here today, and thanks to Joe and to Ian, who are two of the companies that we work with here at Arctic Shores. So looking forward to having a conversation on this hot topic. So without further ado, skills-based hiring is nothing new. Analysts started talking about the concept of the skills-based organisation back in the late 1990s, and early careers teams are familiar with skills-based hiring actually more than most, because you've been the innovator of your processes to remove assessments that measured experience, such as the CV, to focus more on the potential of candidates. And the skills shortage of the last decade, and I guess the dawn of GenAI in recruitment and AI in the workplace, I guess is part of the reason why skills-based hiring is back in the spotlight for all areas of talent acquisition. But what can early careers teams do to kind of keep innovating? And in the age of the GenAI-enabled candidate, how should we be thinking about the skills and the future skills that will lead to long-term success and improve productivity for our organisations? And also, how can early careers teams become the pioneers, if you like, and the trusted skills-based hiring experts within their organisations, perhaps working with other departments to roll out successful skills-based hiring to other roles and not just for entry-level talent? And this is what we're going to be exploring over the next hour. But although skills-based hiring and skills-based organisations have been around for about a quarter of a century, I think we probably need a bit of a level set to get us started. There's no universal definition of what exactly is skills-based hiring, or even a kind of a universal naming convention for different types of skills between companies, between vendors, or I guess between candidates, which makes the talent acquisition team's job to source talent who have skills which map directly to their taxonomy feel almost impossible. And even with AI-based skills matching, this is still proving to be a bit of a challenge. And we're speaking to a lot of companies who seem to have got themselves somewhat bogged down with this creation of a big skills taxonomy. And so, sort of as a result of some of those conversations and the challenges that we've been seeing, recently Arctic Shores, we've really been thinking quite deeply about skills-based hiring and how should we approach it to try and help companies who get the benefits and the rationale for skills-based hiring, but have got themselves a bit bogged down, to go about it in a slightly more kind of pragmatic and sort of step-by-step approach. Skills-based hiring basically needs to assess whether or not a candidate has the ability to acquire new skills, or maybe has some of those relevant skills right now. Boston Consulting Group have just released an interesting report that said that the current shelf life of a skill is now just 2.5 years. Hard skills are dating really, really quickly. The skills that we need today are not going to be the same skills that we need tomorrow. So we believe it's only if we understand what a person has, what it takes to continue to learn, to adapt and to grow, can we understand whether they'll be able to help our organisations navigate this ever-changing world of work. And so we've tried to simplify the definitions. So for us, we believe that the skills-based hiring approach is underpinned by 2 core principles. The first is that you need to evaluate a candidate based on their current soft skills, hard skills, and critically, their ability to acquire future skills rather than their past experience. And secondly, we need to give candidates an opportunity to show and to demonstrate that they have potential to succeed in a role, rather than simply to tell us about it in an application form or a question-based assessment. So the concept of becoming a skills-led organisation is a pretty simple one. Map out what skills we have and what skills we need, then structure our talent function to allow us to develop talent with the right skills, move around talent with the right skills, and where necessary, acquire talent with the right skills. We all need to do a bit of shifting our mindsets on how we think about skills too. So we kind of believe that historically we've been thinking about a candidate's skills in the wrong way. So I'm going to take the analogy of the tree. So imagine that the leaves on this tree are skills. They come in various colours, shapes, sizes. And depending on the type of role, the specific leaves may be shaped slightly differently. So the leaves for role A may be more like an ash leaf, whereas the role B's leaves are more like an oak. And this reflects which skills are required for success in each role. And those might even sort of slightly differ from company to company. However, if you know anything about trees, you'll know that it's the strength of the roots that enables the trees to get stronger each year, to grow new branches and to replenish new leaves. It's the roots that will dictate things like a person's learning agility, their determination, and you guessed it, their ability to acquire new skills, to develop their existing skills and keep up to date with evolving best practices. And we like to think of these roots as what we call skill enablers. And that's why we need to make sure that in a skills-based hiring process, we're looking at a candidate's roots as much as their leaves, or their skill enablers as much as their current skills. And the additional challenge that we all now have is that we need to consider this in this new era of the GenAI enabled candidate, that it's making it more difficult for companies to get an authentic insight into candidates and to really identify and understand their true potential. We conducted some research last year with UCL to analyse how effective ChatGPT performed in completing commonly used application tools and assessments. I mean, it was unsurprisingly CVs and applications all look the same. In fact, I was speaking to one employer recently who'd received 80 identical, and I really do mean identical, application forms for a role. But the impact of ChatGPT and candidate use of GenAI extends beyond the CV and application forms to assessments widely used in recruitment. So we found that it scores higher than almost 99% of candidates in a traditional verbal reasoning test, and it scored in the 70th percentile in situational judgment tests, which you all know is sort of a standard cutoff point. And it also aces question-based personality tests. And not only does ChatGPT have a desirable default personality of its own, it can also adapt that personality according to the job description that you can cut and paste into it. So to go back to the earlier point about the shift towards skills-based hiring, what's clear from the latest research from the likes of McKinsey and the World Economic Forum is that AI is having a huge impact on the types of skills that employers are currently and should be looking for in the future. Just to remind you of the tree analogy from earlier, what's clear is that we need to be looking at the skill enablers, those core strengths made up of personality and what we at Arctic Shores call workplace intelligence of candidates. And this data isn't exclusive to early careers, it's about the complete workforce shift in skills. But because early careers teams have been leading the charge on scrapping CVs or requesting specific qualifications and have honed in on focusing and identifying candidates' potential, they're all kind of primed to lead this overhaul of recruitment. And its early careers teams have got a real opportunity to wield influence in other areas of the business that are struggling to fill roles using traditional means. And so in summary, there's an opportunity for early careers teams to really lead the way in their organisations to shape a broader but pragmatic approach to skills-based hiring. But early careers recruitment too must adapt. And there's three things that really need to change and evolve: what we assess, how we assess, and the impact of these changes on the way candidates, early careers teams and organisations approach hiring. And early careers teams now have a real opportunity to wield that influence in other areas of the business that are facing skills shortages. And you're about to hear from Joe and from Ian, who are leaders that have implemented skills-based hiring in their early careers functions and have or are thinking about how they help other functions or other bits of the business to take an innovative new approach. And I mentioned we've been doing a lot of thinking about this at Arctic Shores. And we've brought that thinking together into a new playbook that we'll be publishing. But I just want to share with you one thing from it right now to wrap up. And it reflects the approach taken by Joe and Molson Coors. I'll hear more about it in a second. But the first stage is really about, once you've shifted mindsets in the organisation, you want to start with a pilot. Don't try and introduce an entire new process across an entire organisation. Take one role, demonstrate that it works, and take a gradual approach. Be sure to enlist advocates, within the HR function, because it'll make your life easier. But also, think about finding hiring managers who might be a bit more up for doing something differently. Make sure you take a data-led approach. Identify key metrics at the start of the change process so you've got something to compare your results to. And then it's about rolling it out. It's time to demonstrate the value of making a change. The next thing is about recording the return on investment, the impact, the change, and then repeat it. You get the opportunity then to expand the pilot even more widely across different roles. So I'm going to finish there and let you hear from Joe and Ian now. Thank you.
Stella, that was great. Thank you very much. Can I just slightly revisit one of the points you were just saying there, because I think this is quite important for our audience. So do you think that's because one of the things I thought is that actually in the UK specifically, compared to other territories where subject has much less to do with hiring than it does, you don't need to be a lawyer to, don't need a law degree to be a lawyer kind of approach. So do you think there's a lot of opportunity for actually a lot of the skill base that exists within early careers teams to actually use that knowledge elsewhere in organizations and talent function? Because it's striking me that experienced hiring has always been much more CV experience driven. I just wonder if it's worth expanding on that, because part of me thinks there's a real opportunity for early careers teams to show their expertise and kind of grow that out.
Absolutely. And I guess that's one of the reasons why, we're sort of excited to be speaking to ISE and some of your members, because we kind of identify that opportunity for influence and leadership, and to be, taking some of that experience and expertise and sharing it more widely. And, and actually that journey, I suppose, in some ways reflects the experience and the story of Arctic Shores, in that, our heritage, and we started out really very focused on early careers recruitment and working in that space. But we identified that many of our customers were struggling to, in the age of digitization and automation, that many of our customers had roles outside early careers that were open for 100, 150, 200 days. And, they wanted to find a way to broaden talent pools. They were all kind of fishing in the same pond. They were frustrated about the progress that they'd been making on some of their diversity goals. And frankly, the open roles were presenting a real business challenge. And one of the first companies that we worked in this regard, Siemens, who we'd worked with for many, many years on their graduate hiring and then some of their apprentice hiring. And then we said, well, let's see if we can take some of the things and the approaches and the mindsets and the tools that we've been using together in early careers and roll it out to, it was a project, it was called a project engineer, but really it became a project manager job description. And we worked with Siemens to just fundamentally change the job description and, move away from listing a whole load of specific qualifications or requirements and hone in on the skills or the skill enablers that somebody, a high performer in that role, would need to exhibit. The results that they had were just incredible. They had ended up with a short list of 8 candidates who they said they actually could have hired any single one of them. And they hired 2 of them and actually went on to hire a third person into a different role. And they are now looking to roll that out across the whole of the UK. I really would encourage that pilot approach, and I'm sure Joe might have something to say on that front as well, because this is a change. It's a new way of thinking. It's a new way of approaching things. And I think if you try to do it across an entire organization or an entire department at once, you get back to that challenge of, God, it all just becomes too difficult to do. So do a pilot, get that data, capture the data, you've then got a brilliant story to tell around the organization. Siemens now tell us, the team at Siemens now tell us that they have hiring managers coming to them saying, we want to do that Arctic Shores thing with you. So, get a success story and take people with you in that way.
Great, thanks, Estelle. So as you said, we're going to hear from Joe and Ian a bit more now as well. So I've got a few questions lined up. Just a reminder that the Q&A function is open. Please pop any questions in for Estelle, Ian or Joe as we go through the next bit of the webinar. We've got some time to get to those at the end. So I've got a question both for Ian and Joe, for yourself to kind of kick us off, really. So I don't know if you want to answer this one first, Joe. And it's just actually a bit of insight into how you've transformed your early careers hiring strategy within your organisation, and what you think is different about your process. So why don't you take us through that first of all?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, Stephen. I think we pretty much re-energized our early careers hiring process around 3 years ago. to move towards that skill-based approach. And we did it from an inclusivity perspective. That was our why, essentially. How can we facilitate underrepresented groups the opportunity to apply for our graduate and apprentice roles? And using that skills-based approach, not reviewing CVs, tailoring the skills-based approach, not just using Arctic Shores, but in the discovery day process, really transformed it, and allowed us to be more inclusive, allowed us to make adjustments. And then I think the key part for us was, how do we get the inputs from the people that we brought in via that approach to constantly improve year on year how we're doing it and what we're doing? Because look, you kind of think things around early careers recruitment, but fundamentally it's changing so rapidly that you need to really tap in to those kind of knowledge sources, essentially, who've been through the process and can give you that feedback on what you're doing and how you're doing it.
What is it that's driving that change, Joe? Is it the needs of the business? Is it changing attitudes and aspirations of those coming through education? Or is it, as most things, a combination of all those things?
Yeah, the easy answer is a combination of all. I think if you're looking at a skills-based hiring approach for typically experienced hire roles or early careers, the critical thing is know your why. Why are you doing this? Once you know your why, and that can be quality, that can be skill shortage, that can be diversity, that's the story to articulate and educate across that community and the organisation that you need to influence. And once you know your why, then you can measure the success of what you're doing.
Got it. Thanks, Joe. Ian, sort of same question to yourself. The early careers hiring your organisation, how have you been transforming your strategy, and what's different about what you do now?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I think I would guess that our journey is very similar to a lot of organisations, and the need for us to change came from, we're very pro early careers and always have been as an organisation, but we had our graduate programme, we had our degree apprenticeships, they've been feeding in. We've also got our social values team driving work experience. Obviously, T-levels are now a thing. So we had all of this activity going on, but actually to come back to it, how do you assess candidates through all of those different routes? Some of them 16, some of them 18, some of them postgrad. How do you assess them all ultimately to find who's going to be successful in your organization? Because that's really what we're trying to do, is bring people in who are going to have long careers and be successful. And what we started to realize is our attrition on those various programs was kind of driven by the fact we weren't quite getting that right. So I think, again, a lot of organizations fall into the trap of relying on the CV, which, especially in a kind of early careers context, someone at 16 may or may not have had any support in how to develop a CV. Someone going through university, again, may have had different degrees of coaching. So the CV has a sort of place in communicating some basic information. But I think in this population in particular, what we're trying to do is what we needed to do was get to the core of what would make someone successful. And we did quite a lot of work on it, but actually what we realized is the shopping list was really small. There was a really small set of characteristics which were the kind of defining success factors for people. And so what we then needed to do is bring that right at the front of our hiring process. So we then know we're filtering in people who have those core skills, because someone could come to us as a graduate with a degree, or we might be putting them on a civil engineering degree themselves. But what we need to know is what's the enabler for them to be successful, because we're kind of investing in the potential, not the finished product. So that was kind of the mover. So, and I think we'll come on to talk about what we did differently, but ultimately it was identifying those key skills and then putting that right at the front of our assessment process.
So Ian, could you talk us through a little bit in terms of actually what steps did you take to get there? Did you focus on specific roles or goals? Estelle talked about, experience at Siemens of having a specific role that changed first, almost like a pilot approach. Why don't you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so we'd had a graduate program running for a number of years. We'd had our apprentice programs. Those essentially all feed the same population for us. There's a kind of core 4 roles within our job hierarchy, which is the kind of majority of our organisation. So yeah, it was kind of possibly easier for us to say these are the 4 professions or functions that we're feeding with those programs. The challenge we really had is, as an organisation, we were growing. We're different sectors. I mean, every sector's got a skill shortage, but construction engineering is particularly sharp for us. So we had a growing organisation. We needed to attract and attract more people. What we also started to realise is, and I think this has really exploded in the last 12 months, is our application numbers are skyrocketing. We're getting so many more people coming through all of our attraction channels, which you think, well, that's great. But it's like, how do you then rationalise that? How do you filter that down? Because you can't assess 800 candidates face to face. So you need systems in place to kind of work with you. And then the last thing, which Joe touched on, is there's a whole diversity challenge of we obviously want we want people who've expected to come to our sector from day one, but we also want people who haven't made their mind up, and we want to sell to them what we're doing. So to come back to the question, yeah, we focused around some specific roles. We focused around the sell that we were able to give people. So it wasn't just, you've always wanted to be an engineer. It might be here's what we offer. And that helped us kind of grow our attraction, our attraction across different platforms. But really, and I'll maybe talk about this again later, but when I said about putting the skills-based hiring right at the front, set up an assessment and actually do very little filtering before you conduct that assessment. You don't really need to know a lot about an individual. Perhaps that they've got the right to work in your country, but you don't really need to do a huge amount before you put them into that assessment. But what we also were very public about the assessment we were doing and why we were doing it. So we were sharing very openly with candidates, this is the assessment we do, this is the face-to-face assessment we'll do after that, this is the process that you'll follow. And we just found that really helpful in engaging people in the process, but getting the right behaviours into that process right at the start.
Right, I'll definitely come back to that, Ian, in a couple of questions' time. Yeah, but Joe, just on the steps piece, is there anything that you'd add to the experience of Ian? Is that broadly a similar? Is that a picture you kind of recognise in terms of the steps of taking people through this process?
Yeah, exactly that. I think, look, our overarching theme is ruling people in as opposed to out. So the more that we can do that first stage of the upfront skills assessment, we're ruling people in, as I say, instead of out. And to echo Ian's point, we're facing a huge increase in volume of applications. How are we being equitable in terms of approaching that volume? How do we unearth the real talent in that volume? These are the things that we're facing as an early careers team, and that the initial assessment helps out. But again, rule in instead of out, clear communication as to what the assessment is for the candidates, so they know what to expect, really important. And then that helps mitigate bias from TA and early careers teams as well, actually. So that's a really important point too.
It kind of leads quite nicely into the next question that we were going to cover, which is that how do you have you brought other people from within your organisation on this journey and get those that maybe not so directly involved, or actually all your stakeholders who may not be fully engaged or thinking about the process? How do you get them to come along this journey with you?
I think journey is the right word, to be honest. When you're trying to train something that's been done, i.e. using CVs and experience to recruit, that's been done for 150 or 200 years, is probably the only thing in HR that hasn't changed, actually. But I think I come back to the earlier point of knowing your why, whether it be early careers, skills-based hiring, or as we put into experienced hire, skills-based hiring. The education piece, educate everybody. And what I mean by that is get leadership buy-in, the hiring community. You need to educate your HR teams as well. That's really, really important. And then I think once you've done the education piece, you'll get the buy-in if you know your why as well. But then it starts small, be precise, be accurate, use that data that you're going to get from an initial trial. I actually went one step further. I trialed it in my own team. First of all, I thought to myself, I can't be authentic and passionate about this approach if I can't demonstrate that I've not done it myself. And I was amazed from the results, from a diversity perspective, from a quality of hire perspective, from a candidate experience perspective as well, which is really important. And I was so impressed that I restructured my own team to accommodate not one hires, but two hires, both of which are absolutely succeeding in the organisation. So I had my own personal story, I had that authenticity, plus the data points to expand it further. So yeah, I think they'll be my key kind of points on that.
Thanks, Joe. Ian, anything you'd expand on that before I ask my next question in terms of that journey taking your organisation through?
No, well, a few. I think we had to push the organisation a little bit. I think sometimes when you run what seems like quite a long assessment process for individuals, people who are just used to the interview and the CV, think it's a bit onerous and maybe a bit harsh on the individual. But I think the main thing, as I said before, was like explaining what we're doing. You don't have to get everyone to understand, but just being really clear and being really open. Joe's point about opting a lot of people into a process, one of the benefits, I think, if you're really public about how your assessment is going to run and what you're going to do, is the assessment process becomes an engagement tool in itself. The right people will build their engagement through that process, and but candidates who want to opt out of that process are probably the ones that aren't right for you in the first place. So I think again, just being really public and clear and transparent about what you're doing and why, internally and externally, has some real benefits.
And just to ask the next question, actually, well, it should lead on to it. Actually, I'm just interested in expanding a bit because there's a difference in between your business and Joe. So I might be speaking unfairly about Joe's business, but that's probably less driven by the subject somebody studied as a gateway, whereas in line of your business, you do need to have an engineering construction type background. Yeah.
So we're predominantly engineers, surveyors, project managers. That's the real heart of what we do. But what's happening in our sector is that innovation and technology is hitting us very quickly and very hard. So, we have engineers that just model in a digital environment. That's what they do, and they're still civil engineers. They're still, but there isn't any degree specifically feeding that yet. So how do we feed people into those professions? And every industry will have their same pockets of innovation where you're like, well, I've got a hiring need, but there isn't actually anything feeding it because these jobs didn't exist 5 years ago. So what do we do? So what we have to then rely on is some core knowledge, but then actually core skills. Like what are the skills? What are the real enablers for those people to transfer their skills into a new environment? So there's definitely a benefit for us in, as you say, yes, there's a very defined core for what we do, but we know that there will be things in our industry in 5 to 10 years' time that we just don't have sight of yet, and we need people who will lean into that rather than out of it.
Right. Reminds me, I'm going to a friend of mine's architecture practice a few years ago. I'm like, well, your drawing boards. I used to love drawings. I haven't used those for years. Architecture is a drawing board. So you very nicely segued yourself into actually the next question, which is around those skills enablers and those skills that you focus on. What are they? What are you focusing on?
Well, I think what we realise is that there's a difference between a civil structural engineer that wants to put their boots on and go out on site and do that work practically, to someone who wants to sit in a consultancy and do that, some of the kind of engineering in theory. And both of those things are really important in our industry. But we learned on the first side that we have a bias for the first side. So we kind of realised that there was I don't know what adjective you would use, but sort of resilience and adaptability was really key for us, because anyone who's done some home renovations will know it doesn't matter how you plan it, you're always going to have surprises, you're always going to have issues, and that's a core part of our sector. So individuals that can problem solve in the minute, individuals that don't get flustered when they get hit with a problem, and they can just go, okay, take this in a stride, reprogram, reprioritize. That sort of approach is really, really important to us. And then a kind of level of learning curiosity. So again, when we talk about the assessment, but also our assessment centres, it's people that kind of show through their approach that they actually are curious to learn more, because that's kind of how we get better and where we earn our money. So there's a few key skills in there, but also it's a busy sector. Like, we are a fast moving sector, so certainly a level of kind of conscientiousness and wanting to see the job out. Those sorts of things are where we've really focused our attention.
And we talk a lot about AI in terms of actually how it's changing recruitment process, it's changing how students apply to jobs. But I also think it's interesting thinking about AI sector by sector, and we spoke to law firms in the past. So I'd imagine there's very specific AI products, tools that are specific to your industry. Is it changing the nature of early careers roles? Are they having to do, I don't know, less of the grunt work they may have to? I just wonder if it's worth thinking about how that's changing, how much that is changing your sector.
I think the practical nature of our business probably means, because we're not doing things on computers, we're building buildings. So there's a limit to how much AI will help you on that. I think we're segueing away from early careers a little bit, but our ability to learn between projects, our ability to reprogram our builds based on previous learnings, like that sort of stuff, is where AI is going to really help us. But it's quite sophisticated, so that is starting to come in, but probably not to the level it might be in the IT sector, for example.
Right, thanks, Ian. Back to yourself, Joe. I just wanted you to touch on that a little bit, just around actually the skills that you are focusing on, those enablers, and then ask the same question for Ian around. I'd imagine in the context of your world, AI is different again to everybody else. What kind of things are you thinking about?
Yeah, similar to Ian, I think there'll be consistency with a lot of early career employers. I think that resilience piece is really important. We haven't had the most stable of times externally over the last kind of 5 or 6 years, and I think that's a really important point. Curiosity, again, adaptability for that breadth piece. And then I think there's a piece definitely around critical thinking as well, which is probably related to AI. We're just exploring, as a talent acquisition team, what sort of guidance we give to early career candidates on using AI in our processes. And I think the overarching theme of that would be is, be critical with the results that you're getting from the AI tools that you're using. So I think, there's some of the things that we're thinking about from a skills enabler. And I suspect a lot of people on the call are thinking the same sorts of things as well.
Yeah, so some of the videos I've seen on YouTube are kind of like, I saw one the other day of a candidate who had a video interview running, had their phone linked to an AI product that was linked to their CV, and in real time, instant, they were getting the answers to read off to the interview. And I'm like, whoa, that was a very different world to what I grew up in recruitment terms.
It is, and I think Estelle's point at the start, the organisation mentioned receiving 80 very similar CVs, I think it was. We're starting to see, obviously, a higher quality of CV production, as we call it. But how do we really get into the detail, as an example, of that person's profile, to make sure it's an accurate reflection of what we need as an organisation from a skills perspective? So all these things, we're facing into as a TA team pretty quickly. Right.
So how are you measuring that success, KPIs? Because obviously there's hiring volumes, measures of quality of hiring. Is there anything different about the KPIs and measurements that you're using now?
I think I think there's a real distinction between short-term measurements and longer-term ones. Look, when you adopt a skills-based hiring approach, which we've done thoroughly created the last few years, but for typically experienced hire roles, the last kind of 12 to 18 months, you kind of want to fast forward to 2 to 3, 4 years from now, because fundamentally, I've sold the argument with my stakeholders on we're going to get high potential people. So all these people moving quickly into more senior roles or gaining breadth in their careers. So there's a piece around that. There's definitely an immediate shorter term piece around candidate experience. How do they feel about it? What are the diversity metrics of the groups that we're bringing in? These are kind of short term data points. So I do think there's that mix of the short term piece, the longer term piece of performance as well. Essentially, we want high performers with high potential in our organisations. So there's a few different metrics that we're working through, but I don't think there's anything fundamentally different, Stephen, if I'm really honest.
Yeah, the metrics are the measures, aren't they? And it's always that difficulty because you kind of want to know what the impact is 4 or 5 years down the line, which is
absolutely.
You never know who you didn't hire, which is the other challenge to some of these measures, isn't it? Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I think just one more point, Stephen, I think it's really important, is that, look, I think whether you do skills-based hiring, whether you do your normal experienced hire process, don't be scared of the risk, because we all make hiring mistakes anyway. There's not a single organisation in existence that hasn't made a hiring mistake. I think everyone on this panel have made some sort of hiring mistake. So don't be scared of the risk either. It's a really important point.
So can I just drop you back in there? I guess the heart of what you're doing as well is measuring the success of the tools you create and implement. Do you see anything changing in the measures that you're using or working with your clients on?
Yeah, well, thanks for bringing back in, because I was kind of trying to stick my hand out, jumping on the points that Joe and Ian were making around what is it that they're actually looking for, and what are the skill enablers that are important. And as a disruptive psychometric assessment company, you probably won't be surprised to learn that we've been doing a huge amount of thinking about this, prompted in part by what we've seen, the hundreds of companies that we've worked with. What have they been looking at? Looking at the almost 3 million candidates that we have assessed, and also looking at some of the the literature from the lofty organisations around the world that have been doing the studies and the science on this. And I think the direction of travel and where we're going at Arctic Shores, and you'll see some more of this partly in the playbook I've mentioned, but also in where we are thinking about our product and the assessment, is that really the sort of 3 buckets of skill enablers that are critical. And the examples and the things that Joe and Ian have touched upon, we think that actually could all be fitted into one of those 3 buckets. And those things are around thinking style. So, it tells us about a kind of a person's innate ability to acquire knowledge, to adapt, to think critically, to think strategically, to be a problem solver, that curiosity piece, and also kind of decision making. Then the second bucket is around sort of self-management, which I suppose is something that we've all been thinking about sort of post-COVID. But this tells us about how sort of determined or persistent a person might be, how well they might be able to focus or to navigate challenges, the kind of environment they might thrive in, or the sort of levels of emotional control that they might display in challenging circumstances. And then the third bucket is around how somebody interacts with other people. So, this is going to tell us about how they might collaborate, how they might sort of understand the emotions of other people, grasp nuance, kind of be perceptive about what's going on, and then adapt their behaviours as a result. And for us, we believe, and we can see from the research, that it's those 3 buckets that are going to be critical. And actually, the other thing that we love about that is it is at the absolute opposite end of the spectrum of those organizations that have been spending huge amounts of time, energy, money, and resource into creating hugely complex skills taxonomies with tens of thousands of different skill categorizations. And so kind of our view and direction of thinking is that looking at those three buckets will really help companies to identify the critical skill enablers that are going to be important for success in the AI workplace.
Great, thanks, Estelle. Can I just bring you in on that question as well, in terms of the actual measurements to use and those specific sort of metrics, KPIs that you wanted to focus on? Are they the same as what Ian was talking about, or sorry, as Joe was talking about? Would you use anything different in your organisation?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, similar. I think one thing I think I touched on was that our application numbers grew significantly. So, and that's a I think that's a byproduct of AI. I think AI will help candidates apply quickly to multiple places. So I think as an organisation, you can be pretty happy that AI will drive people to you. That's great. But then how do you funnel that? How do you go from 800 applications to a kind of appropriate number that you actually want to meet, assess? And we run an assessment centre, which I'm a big fan of, but you don't want to run 50 assessment centres. So how do you do that? So the success and failure of all of this is how well or how good you are at filtering from that number down to a manageable number to assess. So our KPIs would have been the same as Joe's. I think a diversity mix in our pools and watching that diversity mix as we filter was really important to us, that we weren't creating a process that unfairly put a bias and filtered certain people or characteristics out. I think that was really, really important. But getting to a core of people who we knew had the fundamentals which meant we knew that they would perform well in our organisation. That's the trick. And I think, to come back to what Estelle was saying, you can really overcomplicate that. I think you can get yourself into a place where you say, well, these are the 30 skills that we think we want people to have. And what you're doing there is you're trying to find the perfect candidate, not a good candidate. And I think if you, and you're not really allowing for any nuance within that as well. So if you say, well, we want a number of characteristics, but there's 3 here that are vital to us. So every candidate might have 20 characteristics that we're interested in, but there's 3 that are the kind of, I'm hesitating before I say non-negotiables, but there's 3 that we really care about. And if we get those 3, everything else is in the conversation. So when I talked about that filtering, it's about making sure you keep your diversity through that process, but also filter in those core skills that are really the kind of deciding factor for you.
That's great, thanks, Ian. I'm just having a look at this. Sorry, looking at the corner of my eye. They've got some questions coming through, which is great. So we've got 3 questions. So just a reminder, we'll finish the webinar at 1:30. So we've got about 10 minutes left. So just before I go to those questions, and please do pop any more in, we'll have time for some more if you want to ask those questions. A quick question back to you, Estelle, just to kind of wrap us up, really. Is out of everything that we've sort of covered, we talked a lot about the way organisations like Ian's and Joe's are doing things differently, the different work you're doing. What do you think still needs to change in the world of early careers and in this age of AI?
Yeah, well, I think there's probably kind of 3 things. I've touched on a couple of one. I mean, I think what you assess needs to change. So that focus on the skill enablers that I spoke about, and I think that that comes about because the roles are changing. What humans will be will be used for in the workplace, and what we can use technology and AI to do in the workplace means that we sort of rethink about what becomes important and what to assess. I think in the second thing is then kind of how you assess. So in the world of the GenAI enabled candidate, how vulnerable is your process to getting an authentic insight into a candidate? So are you really getting a proper insight into the candidate, or are you getting an insight into their ability to use ChatGPT? So just thinking about the different stages in the recruitment process. And then I think the other thing that probably needs to change, and I think this comes, I think, a bit into my last point, but I think it's also around candidate experience, is about, giving candidates some guidance on the use of GenAI in applications. So, there's some organizations that, have taken the decision to sort of just outright ban it. I think that's an interesting one, and it'll be interesting to see if they're still taking that position sort of in a couple of years' time. But I think that a lot of organisations are kind of understanding that, well, actually, GenAI is here, candidates are using it, we're using it in our company, so it seems a bit wrong to just ban it. But I think it's new for companies, it's also new for candidates. So I think that the best companies, or certainly some innovative companies, are providing some guidance on the careers website, saying, look, this is what it's okay to use GenAI for in your application, and this is what it's not okay to do. Because I think a lot of candidates are caught between this challenge of, they don't want to cheat or to risk progression in the role, but equally they sort of think, well, everyone else is going to be using ChatGPT, so if I don't, I'm putting myself at a disadvantage. And so I think those are some of the areas that I think we still need to be thinking about and then possibly rethinking.
Yeah, agreed. But it always strikes me that when we come to generative AI, it was barely a year ago it was appearing on my radar, really. So we were talking earlier, weren't we, about the pace of change in all our industries, but nothing's happened it's changed things quite so quickly as GenAI is doing. Right, so as I said, I've got some questions. So we've got 3 on the Q&A so far. So if I just go through those. So the first question we had is about facing challenges from stakeholders that prefer to still recruit in a more traditional way. So is that something that you've experienced? And then how did you come across anything different that we haven't said already about how we overcame that? Anybody want to take that one first, or shall I pick on somebody?
I can take that if you want me to, Stephen. Something I've faced into. I think it goes back to my earlier point, is pilot it first of all and get the results and share them. You kind of face challenges from stakeholders because you're changing something that's been in situ for 100 or so years. But if you've got the data points, you're armed with those experiences, you start small and be precise, that I mentioned earlier on in the webinar. And then there are always stakeholders in organizations who want to be a bit more innovative, want to try new things. There are leaders as well that want to do that. So if you combine that group with real confirmation of the why, then you'll face into some of those challenges. But look, we've done it a few times here at Molson Coors. It's not going to be for every role. We recognise that, but we do think there are large groupings of positions in our organisation, in addition to early careers, that skills-based hiring could really work for, and we've seen some amazing results out of that. So, look, the more you do it, the more you communicate it, the more you shout about it, and as I say, explain the why and the results, and you'll win over those stakeholders. And also, we used the team from Arctic Shores. I think sometimes having other people tell you the same thing sometimes helps in the world of work, if I'm really honest. So there's a few things there.
Yes, I noticed the example used at Siemens Estelle beforehand. Yeah, having people outside can sometimes help, even though they're saying the same thing, doesn't it? Ian, yourself or your stakeholders, was that something that that you've had challenges managing?
I think yes. I think we are probably, I think they use quotation marks, a traditional business in that respect, in that we've been around for 160 years. The sector, construction's been around forever. So there is a bias to want to do things how we've always done them. What I think as early careers leaders we need to do is recognise the reality we're in, and the talent pools we're fishing from are probably going to be the most GenAI enabled, or likely to be. So we're going to have to do something different in that space. So I don't necessarily think you know, if you're hiring an MD, maybe you don't need to worry about it. Maybe you can just, you know, think about the traditional way of recruiting. You don't have to worry about AI for a while, but I think it's here for early careers teams, and I think we need to be brave in having some of those conversations internally to say, look, we need to do it. We cannot filter this many candidates if we don't. So yeah, I think we need to be quite firm with our stakeholders internally in this population in particular, or we're just going to make our jobs harder.
Right. I'm going to roll 2 questions into one next. I've got a question, just a couple of questions. Yeah, I think are a similar thing. So one is quite straightforward. Actually, you know, AI and skills based will does that mean the CV becomes irrelevant? But also, actually, the last question came through around: does this mean that, I'm paraphrasing slightly, do you recruit for skills and then deploy to in a role? So it's the skills before the role. So I think that's quite an interesting concept, if it's at all even possible. So there's 2 bits. Is the CV basically becoming redundant and dead? And then actually, can you recruit for skills first and almost deploy later? Be a bit more relaxed about who comes in. Actually, if you've got the screening in, do you want to take that first? And then I'll come back to Estelle and Joe on that.
And I don't want to fall into the trap of trying to predict the future, but one thing GenAI will do for our employees as well as our prospective candidates is it gives them access to information and able to process and digest information at a pace that we're just not used to. So if you take my profession, engineering, you have an engineering problem, you can just, I say Google it, but you can chat GPT it and probably get an answer that might have taken you years of experience to get to. So I wouldn't say the CV is irrelevant, but it might reposition experience in the hierarchy of what's important when you hire someone. I don't know if that's going to happen. It feels like it might. So I don't think it will necessarily move us totally away from the CV, and we may not go to a 100% skills-based hiring approach, but I think the priority of those things will change drastically. And I think what you also, which we haven't spoken about yet, you need to consider culture as well, is your organization will have a culture of how it wants to operate, how it behaves. As Estelle said, key skill is how people interact. And so what I would sort of come back to is, what is it that you need from a candidate that can't be taught? Because GenAI is going to help people access information. You know, experience might be positioned differently in the hierarchy of priorities, you know, when we hire. But really, as an organization, we need to understand, what is it that we can't teach? What is it that GenAI can't do for us? And that'll be the key enabler for your business going forward.
Joe, can I come to you next? Then I'll come to you, Estelle, because I think that'll be time to wrap up at that point. So, so Joe, any thoughts on that? CV dead and actually recruiting for skills first before the role definition?
I agree with Ian's points, actually. I think we're way off of CV being dead, but I think there'll be more and more organisations phasing them out for certain positions potentially, or, to Ian's point, reducing the weighting of experience in the hiring process, as an example. In terms of skills-based hiring, we took at Molson Coors the role-specific approach to get the buy-in and education for stakeholders involved in the process. But fundamentally, all early careers hiring is for the skills for the future, isn't it? So I think either or, but I would say go and trial it and have a go and see what you can do.
So Estelle, finally over to you as our webinar sponsors today. I think you should definitely have the last word. So what do you see that? I mean, is the CV now dead? Will we have roles where organisations actually we're only recruiting to skills, and then we'll decide what job you do once you actually walk through the door? I think it was a bit extreme to me, but what are your thoughts on that? If you get your crystal ball out.
Well, I think as Joe and Ian know, at Arctic Shores, we're on a bit of a mission to scrap the CV as far as we possibly can. And, it's proven to be, it's a terrible predictor of future performance. And every time we look and read a CV, we are bringing to it, I think 150 subconscious biases. So at a very crude level, we would love to see the CV scrapped, but I hear what we're saying about that. That we're not saying that experience never matters or is never relevant. We're just saying, and I think this is where Jo and Ian are coming from, is that it should not be the starting point of what you're looking for or what you're thinking about. So there will be sometimes a role for looking at experience. And then on the point about, is it role first or is it skill first? Really interesting question. I would say in the work that we've been doing with our customers, it tends to be role first, just for I think a practical reason. But what it does enable in taking a skills-based and taking this approach is that it means when you come to onboarding and L&D plan, and then further down the line, kind of internal mobility, you actually have a huge amount of information and insight and perspective on that individual candidate that you can then, utilize throughout the kind of the career journey. So we focused very much on the kind of the recruitment point and moment here, but I'm sure there's a whole other webinar on what that then means for onboarding L&D and internal mobility.
Yes, I definitely, this is a subject we're going to be coming back to most definitely. So, but I also think actually going earlier in the food chain, there's a thought, what does this mean for coming through education and understanding skills and deploying that? So, but we probably better not go there, otherwise we'll be keeping people from their lunch maybe at the moment. So, Wally's going to put 3 questions on the screen just so we can capture your immediate feedback on the webinar. But while Wally's doing that, I just wanted to say thank you very much, Estelle, the team at Arctic Shores, for supporting us in this and actually putting all the content together, the panel together for this. Been really great content. And to Jo and Ian for your candor, for taking the time out of busy days and sharing your experiences. It's really interesting to see exactly how all this stuff we're talking about is being deployed in organisations. I know it's something on a lot of the focus groups, etc. we run. It's a very strong topic of conversation. And as I just said, we will definitely be coming back to this. So please pop in your evaluation points there. 3 very quick questions to answer on that. As I said at the very start, we have recorded this. Zoom will process that recording and we will send it out to you, also with contact links. So Estelle, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you at Arctic Shores? If you want to explore this a bit more, we'll send the link. But is there also another way to get in touch?
The best thing to do is on LinkedIn to sign up to our TA Disruptors newsletter, which is where we publish all of our research, our insights, our playbooks, and also where we send links to our TA Disruptors podcast. Or very happy for people to get in touch directly with me on LinkedIn, and Stephen, for you guys to share my contact details with the link.
Fantastic. Okay, so thanks very much, guys. That was a really, really interesting, informative session. Everybody, can we? Well, I was going to say, give me a round of applause. It won't work online, will it? It's because we're doing our development conference yesterday. We'll give a virtual round of applause. Everybody's nodding their heads and clapping their hands at home, I'm sure. Thank you very much for your time. As I said, the link will be coming through. If you've got any questions, any follow-up, you can get in touch with us here at the ISE as well. Enjoy the rest of the day, everybody. Talk to you all soon. And thank you very much, panelists.